Welcome back again. You're still watching us here on The Breakfast Show, and we're going to be talking about one of very interesting issues that we have discussed earlier in the introduction, and that is the security, complexity and challenges facing the internet world today. Now, the internet has become very important in our lives. It plays a very vital role in our daily lives, from social networking to banking to even shopping online and receiving or obtaining information in different fields. Now, because this world has become very connected with each other, there's also a lack of security and privacy between the users and the internet, and even between those who are running companies or organizations and institutions through the internet to serve the customers. Because of the security challenges that has become very critical in the world recently, we are very delighted to have with us in the studio this morning Mr. Olaf Krahmer. He's president of Cisco, to discuss more about the challenges and the trends of the use of the internet in terms of security and privacy. Good morning, and thank you for joining us, sir.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you very much for being here on The Breakfast Show. Now, let's first give the viewers a brief idea of why this issue of security challenges regarding the internet has become very important.
Well, first of all, when you talked in your introduction about the importance of the internet, can you really think back at a time when there was no internet? Just think about your daily life, how often you use the internet and how many things are connected, even in the background if we don't see it and touch it. You mentioned banking, you mentioned a number of other areas. So with more and more things being connected to the internet, the threat level is increasing, because all the different processes and procedures we go through on a daily basis, we take for granted. But if we do banking and someone else steals the passwords, for example, we can imagine the dangers that come out of that. But there are a lot of other dangers also for organizations. It's not only identity theft, but it's also the private information that each organization has and each individual has. So if that goes to the wrong hands, there needs to be a mechanism to properly secure that.
If we're going to talk about the key trends that will impact cyber activity in the Middle East, security rather, in the Middle East, what can you tell us about that?
So first off, there are different types of threats out there. There are, most people have heard about things like viruses and worms and Trojan horses and those types of things, identity theft. But I would also add denial of service attacks. I would also add spam. So if there is one good thing about the report we just published, it is that the amount of spam, which is unwanted email, usually advertising, has gone down last year by about 18%. On the other hand, the types of attacks on privacy and stealing information has gone up.
Yes. Now, because, as I said earlier, the world of the internet is very wide, starting from obtaining false information, whether you are a researcher, a student, or even if you're just trying to surf the internet for some news. That's a segment. The banking segment, again, the hackers who could hack your account and steal your information. That is a segment. And then we talk about the most used segment or part of society, and that's social networking, such as Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook in particular. The privacy of those social networking has become really unprotected, if I may put that in the right context, particularly recently after the Arab Spring. Now, people can easily track you down, steal your information, as you said, steal your photos, and a lot of people are actually curious because they blame the Facebook administration, for instance, for not providing the privacy and the security issue. So can the organizations play a vital role in securing or unsecuring their users?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's their responsibility to work on the security. But the aspect has become more complex, because our lives between private life and business life is blurring. There's a trend which is called bring your own device, which means that when we go to work, we expect to use the same devices that we use for our private life. We want to be able to connect to social media while we are at work. So what it means for organizations now is, where in the past it was rather straightforward to secure the data of an organization, because it's almost like living in a house and then there's a front door and you just protect the front door. But now, if users bring their own devices, they're inside the house and connect the outside world, it's no longer sufficient to protect the front door. So you need to have a different strategy on how to make sure that while there are ways to connect from inside an organization to the outside, that it's not just at the perimeter that things get checked, but there is also an overall architecture across the networks that makes sure that nothing bad comes in and nothing valuable goes out.
Yes, if we're going to talk about the businesses and the exposures of the businesses, whether they are the organizations or the businesses themselves or the consumers dealing with the businesses, and if we're going to talk about in terms of banking or some kind of confidential information that should be between the consumer and the business organization, how can that be controlled in a world where there are a lot of, if I might put them, technology freaks who are very brilliant enough in hacking systems? And recently in the news we have been hearing about a hacker organization that has been claiming that it actually hacked some countries' personal confidential information and segments.
Yes. It's multiple things that you need to take a look at. First, you need to understand what is part of your network. If you're an organization, for example, your network does not end inside the walls of your buildings. It does extend out to your mobile workers who use their mobile phones and tablets to connect to corporate data. So you need to first understand what is the scope that you need to protect. Then you need to be aware of what is the data you would like to protect. You also need to make sure that you monitor everything that is going out as well, because in the past it was just monitoring that nothing bad comes in. So that's different. But I think what's the most critical thing is also the education of the users, because the users often break security policies. And I just read a study that especially the younger generation, 7 out of 10 on a regular basis break security policies just to get their things, to get things done, to connect.
For instance, I mean, can you give us some examples?
For instance, some companies started off and saying you are not allowed to use your mobile device to access the corporate network. And they were trying to set policies against it. But initially it was very easy for users to just say, well, I'm going to do it anyways. And there's a mobile access point they just connected to, and IT was just setting policies, and it's not effective to just have policies. So you need to have either a way to enforce it, but what's probably better is to embrace it, to go with the technology, to enable your employees to be more productive, to be able to use the devices, but then have an intelligent network which can automatically make sure that nothing bad happens.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned this point, because I would like you to clarify further on it. I mean, if there are certain regulations or security measurements that the business organizations are taking to secure the consumers and their private confidential information. If we're going to talk about, for instance, if one of those examples were not to use mobile devices to access the internet, well, that's going to be rather difficult, because if you are an organization, you have to keep up with the technology innovation, because nowadays everybody uses smartphones, and smartphones are used primarily or priorily for the use of the internet. So not everybody can access a laptop, not everybody would want to carry around a heavy laptop, not everybody can find a connection on a laptop. So, you know, how can businesses, with the changes that are happening in the world of technology, keep up with the security challenges?
Yeah, and this is actually a major point, because we've seen a big change over the last 2-3 years. Because 2-3 years ago, most organizations, more than half, actually had policy not allowing, for example, iPads or other tablets in their corporate network. And they found out it's not very effective to just say you can't do it. And at the same time, they also found that they lose out on productivity. Because employees, if they use the tools they want to use, they usually are more productive. So the big shift that we've seen over the last 3 years is that now close to 90% of organizations are embracing the new technology and are allowing this. There are lots of benefits for the organization and for the users. So now, rather than relying on policies and telling don't do this, don't do that, the network has become so intelligent that even if you use your iPad, for example, in a coffee shop, you can log into your corporate data But the network itself recognizes you are now in a coffee shop, so you have access to certain types of information, but not to others. It can also recognize you as a person. So if you log in from a coffee shop, and then there is another instance of you logging in from somewhere else, the system recognizes that can't be. So there must be identity theft or something. And so the network can stop it right away. So even if your password gets compromised, the network can become intelligent enough.
Yeah, I'm really glad you spoke about the password issue and in terms of intelligence, because I do know that in the West, and depending on the sensitivity of the organization, there are more higher security measures that are taken to ensure that confidential information is not passed out or spilled out. Why does these, when we talk about security, we always have to tie it to password or a code? While nowadays and in this century, it's not reliable, because we do see some kind of eye laser detection, thumb detection. There's a lot of voice detection. There's a lot of other means to identify a person that would securely secure his how confidential his information is with the organization, than just a code and a password. Why can't that be changed? Is it more costly? Does it require more tools? Does it require educating the people? How does that work?
Well, in the past it was not easy to incorporate all those different means of identity, because it was based, as you said, just based on entering a password, username and password typically, and then you had access and there was no further control if you are really who you pretend to be. But now the way of handling security is, it's around first the identity, understanding is that person the person he or she said she is. And then the next part is where is that person? There is location awareness, because if you are inside of a corporation, you have access to more than if you are outside. And how are you connected? Is it wirelessly? Is it fixed network? So all of those, and then which department do you work in? For example, if you are in finance, you might not have access to all the customer data. If you're in sales, you have access to the customer data, but not to the finance data. So you can be very granular. In the past, it was close to impossible to enforce that. But now networks have become very intelligent, where you can define it as a policy. And now in terms of the identity, password does not have to be the one to be used. It could be a token. It's a little device which generates a number, and that number is changing on a regular basis. And that's very, very difficult to replicate. So if you have that token, then it's another layer of security to access. You mentioned scanning the eyes or fingerprints. All of that is possible. So the architecture of the network can cope with all those different types, because now it's moved from a one-off transaction to a policy. And the policy says identify the individual, identify the place, and what do they have access to, and what don't they have access to.
Yes. Earlier you mentioned the issue of spams, and spams have become very widely used, but in a different manner, because not only is technology innovating and advancing, but also means of hacking and stealing information, committing crimes through the internet has also become very innovative recently. And a lot of people are being tricked by those who would send you strange emails and trying to grab your attention by saying that you have won some kind of financial prize, or that you've won some kind of trip, and when it's actually a new means of stealing money from you and getting to know more about your confidential information, even your banking account. So how can organizations regulate that? Because if somebody would be easily flattered by that or tricked by that kind of plan, then if he would go and complain, for instance, to the organization or that runs his email system or his bank, they would just say, we're sorry, we can't do anything legally about it. So in terms of law and legality, how can the corporations cooperate with the legal system in different countries to monitor those criminals?
So first off, there are actually some interesting trends in spamming. what most people don't know is that those organizations that send out spam, they seem to be working bankers' hours. You get much less spam emails on the weekend, for example. The highest amount of spam emails is on a Tuesday.
Okay.
And at the same time, spam has become more sophisticated. It's not anymore very random, but it is based on events. When Microsoft launched Windows 8, there was a lot of spam around that topic. In the US, tax season is around February to April. So between February and April in the US, a lot of spam is based on taxes. So spam has become, on the one hand, less, but on the other hand, more sophisticated. One way you can do it is as a user to just check if the email address is really spelled correctly. Because sometimes an O is replaced with a 0, and so just looking at that. But there is also, again, the technology which can help you. Because if there is a website which is fake, there is technology which uses reputation. It's similar to many social networks where you can say like and dislike. The same happens with security threats, where each website and each server gets a reputation. So if there is spam detected from somewhere, then that website gets a certain reputation. And if you use the right technology, or your service provider uses the technology, then that will be flagged right away as spam, so that you are careful what to do with it.
Yes. Now, our final question, sir. Nowadays also consumers are being flattered and also tricked by organizations and businesses that are not legal, that would give them fake information and means of buying assets, or even marketing online by trying to grab their attention and saying if you put $100 per month you'll receive $1,000 at the end of the month. And unfortunately, this is the newest trend that is taking place in the Middle East. There have been a lot of cases against people who are actually been put in jail, claimed that they have stolen money of other people because they helped them join this organization. So how can the consumers beware of the security threats from the internet in terms of businesses that are not correct?
So one area is to work together with a company that provides that filtering, so that there is a certain level of risk taken out. But in the end, as a consumer, you always have to be wary, because you cannot never make things completely secure based on technology alone. So you need to be wary. What's interesting is in terms of the areas where a lot of fraud occurred, you mentioned the financial services. That's one. The number one is actually pharmaceutical products. And the number two is expensive watches. Like the website Rolex is one of the most spoofed sites for spams. So on those spoofed websites, usually it's just like they try to sell you something which is not genuine. On the other hand, the example you used with the financial market is more severe, because you stand to potentially lose money. So I think every consumer needs to be aware of the risks and be very careful where they click and what they do on the internet.
Unfortunately, we live in a very dangerous world, and if we're finding difficulties dealing with visually people being there, then the virtual reality world, of course, is going to be more dangerous, and everyone should be careful with what and how they're dealing the use of the internet. Thank you very much once again, Mr. Olaf Krahmer, President of Cisco, for joining us on the Breakfast Show and for fulfilling us with this useful information. Thank you very much. And before we go to our second segment, Dina Yunus is going to take us to a new place around Egypt to get to know more about this beautiful country and its monuments.